Howdy, it's tubalcain again, and this is Shop Tips number 299, and it's more or less a continuation of 298, but the title of this video is Installing a Bearing by Expansion. Now, in the last video I showed you how to install a bearing by shrinking it, and I shrunk this very bearing here, and it dropped right into this engine housing here. And that's not really the way I normally do it. I do it by expansion, so I'm going to show you that here in just a minute. But as long as I have some dry ice on hand, I'm going to show you graphically here, if you will, how this bearing, which is now at room temperature, shrinks when I pack it in dry ice. Now again, dry ice is nothing more than solid carbon dioxide. And I just went to a store in another town to get this. It's not easy to find around here, but I asked a clerk in an anonymous store, where can I get dry ice in this city? And he says, he's a 35-year-old man, and he said nothing. And I said, do you know what dry ice is? And he said, well, yeah, it's what forms around the freezer in your refrigerator. And I said, well, no, that's not it. And so the reason I'm explaining this is apparently many young people have never seen dry ice or know anything about it, but it's just solid carbon dioxide. It can be made with your carbon dioxide fire extinguisher, but I don't recommend it. And in another video I hope to do some other experiments with dry ice, and this is warm water in an Erlenmeyer flask. Need some smaller pieces in there, I guess. And I did this in the other video too, but I just get a kick out of playing with it. Carbon dioxide vapor. So while that's steaming away, Frankenstein style, let me show you what my setup is here, and then I'm going to go ahead with it. I've got a Mitutoyo dial indicator that will read to the 10th of a thousandth. That bearing is laying up against an immovable object, more or less, although I'm sure some will argue about it because they want to argue about anything. And I made an extra long tip for this indicator because I know somebody's going to say you're going to damage the indicator when it gets so cold. So I made that tip. And now let me turn the indicator on. You know, I'm trying to foolproof things here because people get so nitpicky on these videos. And it's because of their pride. You know, we all are prideful people in this wicked world. Okay, the indicator is on, and the indicator is on a magnetic base fastened to another block of steel, and I can even find the center going this way of the bearing. Now I'm going to turn it to 0. Again, it's in tenths of a thousandths. And then I will zero in on that, but now I'm going to pack the bearing with dry ice. Notice how heavy these vapors are. They immediately want to sink. And this is 98, or rather 109.3 degrees below 0 Fahrenheit. 78 Celsius. By the way, I did burn myself the other day trying to burn a wart off with dry ice. No comments on that, please. Now, I really can't pack that around here or I'm going to bump the indicator. So I'm not going to be able to get this bearing as cold as I want. but that piece of aluminum under it will conduct the cold or the heat away from it, or however you want to put it. And you know, I always have some engineers watching this stuff that I do, and they're a lot smarter than I am. But now let's look at the indicator here, if we can. And you can see that that bearing has already shrunk that's 1/1000th plus a 1/10 of a thousandth, and you can see it's still shrinking. My hands aren't anywhere near it. So at this point, the bearing's still shrinking, and I'm going to turn the video off just for a moment so this doesn't take too long. But I'm not going to touch anything. That's apparently as much as it's going to shrink. That's almost 2/1000ths. It's 18 10/1000ths. So let's see if it fits into the housing. Again, I have no good way to hang on to it. I was going to put a little handle on it, and I did that in a practice session here. Well, it's still shrinking unless I bump something. So let me move the indicator out of the way. Like that. Take the bearing. And again, it drops right in there. And let's see if it expanded enough to stay in there, or will it fall out. Nope. Now I got scolded for doing this, but let's take a look at this bearing now. You're not supposed to drive them out, but this is an old bearing. Normally you don't remove a bearing unless you have to. That is, it's a bad bearing. Well, how are you going to drive it out of there other than to pound on the inner part of the race there, and then all the pressure goes into the balls, so that's bad for it, but there's no other way to do it. No other way to get it out. If you put a puller on this side, you'd still be pulling, and from an inside puller, you'd be pulling and up against the bearings. But I do know the correct way to remove one, and I got scolded for that. So let me get sidetracked here just a little bit and tell you something. Ball bearings are a necessary part in waging any war. There are ball bearings and just everything you can think of, but the Allies, that is, the United States, bombed in Germany the ball bearing factories, and they were in Schweinfurt and another one in Regensburg, and they were so heavily fortified around the bearing factories to protect them that we lost, and they sent a lot of bombers. I forgot how many. It was something like 800 of them, but 96 planes were lost in a couple raids, and 950 airmen were either killed or parachuted out and captured. It was so costly for the Allies that they stopped doing that. These were daytime raids. The British bombed at night. The Americans did precision bombing during the day using the Norden bomb sight. But that's how important ball bearings are. That we would go to that expense, and it was millions and millions of dollars back then, to try to get rid of them, stop their bearing production. But the Germans were so ingenious that they were immediately able to rebuild, and they had massive quantities of bearings in storage in different sites, so it really didn't affect a thing as far as what the Germans were doing. So the entire raids were pretty much a failure, and if you want to see a good account of that, watch the movie, and I think you can find it on YouTube, that's called The Memphis Belle, and that's all about those raids. So check that out. Schweinfurt and Regensburg. I know I got way off topic, but that's my information on ball bearings. Now let's get back to the subject at hand. I'm going to drive this bearing out, and I'm going to heat up the housing to 350 degrees, and you're going to see that with the housing expanded and the bearing at room temperature, again, there's enough of a differential there where the bearing will drop right in. Now, you have to be very careful when you do that you don't damage the bearings, because some bearings, this bearing has no seals on it, but many bearings, like this brand new bearing here, have oil seals that are made of plastic or rubber or whatever. But if you drop this cold bearing into a hot housing and the housing is too hot, you can damage the seal, then you've ruined the bearing. I removed the bearing, and actually the entire housing now is rather cold to the touch, and it has equalized. This is still cool, but not all that cold. So by the time I heat this up, this will be at room temperature. Now, I know what you're thinking. Why don't you measure this and this? But I'm not going to do that. But what I want to do here is to put a little handle on this bearing. So I'm just going to take this screw and a couple washers and do this. That way I can do that without burning myself, because this is going to be hot enough. And I got the kitchen oven warming up, and I intend to go on upstairs, and I'll see you in the kitchen here momentarily. Note this now. That doesn't put the flame out, but here's the inlet right here, and when I get carbon dioxide in there, the flame instantly goes out. And of course, carbon dioxide fire extinguishers are in every building. I got several of them here in my home. You normally don't see them in houses, but in all commercial establishments you will see CO2 fire extinguishers where there are chemicals and gasoline and things like that. Upstairs we go. Here's my block of dry ice. Again, I'm getting way off topic, but I like doing this stuff. There's a block of dry ice. Here's my low temperature differential Stirling hot air engine. I did not make this one, but watch what happens when I put it on the dry ice. It's set for just a moment, and it runs. Now it's going in the clockwise direction. Remember that now, that it's going clockwise. And it's cold enough to where it's running even though it's off the ice now. Put my hand on it, warm it up, and it's going to slow down. Now in a minute I'm going to take this up to the kitchen when I go to the kitchen for this bearing. And I'm going to run it on a coffee cup, a cup of hot water. Notice that it was going in the clockwise direction. Remember that. Alright, let's go to the kitchen. I'm up in the kitchen now, and if this interests you, because I'm not telling you how Stirlings run, but look at this video, Principles of Stirling Hot Air Engines, and I explain how these actually work. But here's a cup of boiling water, and now let's heat it up. It'll take a moment, but there's a difference in temperature here. And the hot side now here, boiling water is 212 and room temperature is 70, so there's 142 degrees difference. And that's running already, and notice in the opposite direction. But when I was doing it on dry ice, the temperature of the dry ice was 110 and the room was 70, so there was 180 degrees difference. And it ran faster on dry ice because there was a greater differential. But it's running just fine in the opposite direction now. on hot water. You can buy these commercially. This would be a good science project for children. Again, the residual heat will keep it running for a few moments. The displacer is foam. Now let's get back to the subject at hand, the bearing. I'm right next to the kitchen oven, and that engine housing has been in the oven at 350 for 15 minutes or so. Here's the cold bearing, here's the expanded housing, drops right in. So that's installing a bearing by what I'm calling expansion rather than shrinking it, which I did in the other video. But how cool is that? Now if you have trouble, you can also cool this off in the freezer or with dry ice and heat the housing if possible. But now if there are seals and rubber parts and things like this, you can't put it in the oven. Now that's going to take a while to there's a lot of working time. A lot of working time. Let me grab some dry ice and throw it on there. Now I've got some ice water. I'll watch what happens when I cool it. Because now I'm shrinking the housing. Good science project, kids. I'm turning the inside of the bearing now. Remember, don't ruin a bearing with this rubber seal on it by getting it too hot. Now you might get away with this with the lower temperature. Well, it's still pretty darn hot, too hot to touch. This was heated to 350. Maybe 250 would work, I don't know. Some people said they put it out in the summer sun. You know how hot metal will get in the driveway in the summer, sometimes so hot you can't touch it. That alone may expand it enough, I don't know. But that completes this video and this series of videos. Be sure and watch that first one as well on shrinking, this one on expanding. Hope you enjoyed it. This is tubalcain saying so long for now.